Good evening, good evening, and welcome to It's About Time. I'm Trudy, and I will be reviewing with you. Today, we'll be going over Job chapters 40, 41, and 42. So, we have just come out of the point where God has actually started to talk and let Job know, and we just in the previous of 39, that God would actually speak about nature and its being, and actually talking about just all the things that He created in Himself. Good evening. Thank you for joining me. So we're going to start at 40, and it says, Then the Lord said to Job, Will the finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer it. So now, as we remember that where Job had become very frustrated with the process of what he was going through, because as we remember, always Job held to the preface that he was an upright and blameless man, not a sinless man, but a blameless man. And he had did nothing to contend with what was actually happening to him. And as we remember through the story, is that his friends came out of compassion to see about him, but ended up being almost like enemies for him because they had lost hope and they lost belief in Job and what Job was actually telling them. And so it became a very contentious situation with the friends that did come. And the irony of it is that these were men that knew uh, knew God, knew the Word, and they thought that they were doing a good deed in bringing themselves to talk to Job to actually help him to be able to repent out of his sin so that he could be forgiven and could be restored from where he was. So, but we've gone all the way through there that now we see actually Job is having a conversation that has actually sprung up with God Himself. Now, remember, this is something that he wanted. He was just like, if I could just plead my case. But here we says, then the Lord said to Job, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Job, you're the one that having a problem with me. So are you going to contend with me, the Almighty? He says, then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am insignificant. So here we find that Job already understood the covering or the association or the relationship that he had with God before. And he felt that he did not have that anymore. So that was what was causing him so much distress, that he felt that God had left him. But God is telling him, uh, here I am now. Where did you think I went? I'm here. So now Job is almost embarrassed. He's to a point of humility at this point, and where he declares that he's insignificant. He's just unworthy to even reply to him. And then he says, I will lay my hands on my mouth once I have spoken, and I will not answer even twice, and I will not add no more. So Job was so humbled from the point or ashamed because of his behavior and what he had contended on doing, that now he's saying, I won't even say another word. I have to control what's going on. And he literally puts his hand over his mouth to make sure that he does not say anything. But it is a relative sign of total submission that he did not want to say anything. Then it goes on. God turns around and he questions Job. And he says, then the Lord answered Job out of the storm and said, now gird up your loins like a man. He said, now don't come here all groveling now. You was talking all of that stuff. Now let's tighten up that belt. Let's stand up straight like a man. You wanted this. This is where we're gonna go with this. I'm gonna let you know all the things that you thought you needed to know, but you're gonna have to take it like a man. Don't get low now. Don't back off of it. You were talking real strong about what you would do in this encounter with me. He says, I will ask you and you instruct me. Since you know so much, because remember, Job had got a little boisterous about his predicament and validating who he was. And so this is where God is really addressing him. And it says, will you really annul my judgment? Do you really think that you are so much higher than I am that what I have allowed to be that you want to take away the judgment that I have? You want to take away my power? Is this what you're saying, Job? Will you condemn me that you may be justified just to be right? Job, is this what you're going to do? Just to prove your point to be right? You know how sometimes we get stuck on a point that we want to be right so badly that it doesn't matter what at what cost to prove that you're right. You might harm someone along the way. Things may go wrong, where it's easier just to back down and just let it be, but you have to be right and you cause damage. So, this is what God is saying to Job. He says, or do you have an arm like God? And can you thunder with a voice like his? You got the right hand of God where you can just have all the power? Is that what you're saying now, Joe? Is this is how you're acting? You acting all brand new. So I need to understand who I'm dealing with. So is this you now, Job? How you're acting? Is your voice like thunder when the voice speaks? It can be heard all over. Is that you, Joe? Or do you have or do you adorn yourself with the eminence of dignity and clothe yourselves with the honor and majesty? Can you wear this robe, this royal robe of creation? Are you this person? Is this you, Joe? I just want to make, it's almost like it's comical the way God is coming at him. It's just like, uh, he's really putting him on front street. It's like, is this who you thought you were? Is this really you? So he's turning this conversation on him to actually let him see where his behavior has actually kind of led him to his own thoughts. And we have to be careful sometimes of our own thoughts, even though we might be in the right, we might be living correctly, but there's still the humility that has to stay with it. That no matter what, that as we believe in God, that whatever his will is for our lives, and we have to be careful when we say that to understand because the will could be something that is uncomfortable, but is whatever your will is for my life, that is what I accept. So this is kind of like where he's going this dialogue with Job, and Job can do nothing but listen. And then it goes on. He says, pour out the overflowing of your anger and look on everyone who is proud and make him low. So, would you be the kind of person you got this kind of power that everybody that you have at your own power that you don't like what's going on or something you said that you're just going to strike them down and make them low? Is this what you're talking about, Joe? This is who you are? He says, look on everyone who is proud and humble him. You're going to break everybody, Joe, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust together, bind them in the hidden places. Then I will also confess to you that your own right hand can save you. So if you have all this power and all this stuff that you were talking, Joe, and now I'm breaking it down of who I am because remember prior to in 39 he was talking about nature and its being, how it came into existence, all the different things that he's done that he called into existence. So now he's trying to let Job, do not compare yourself to me. He's trying to remind him that there is still a distance between man and God. Even though you might be humble, you might be right, you might be blameless, you might be righteous, but you are still not me, and that you have to respect that level of reverence that is existing. So this is what he's telling him. I always say, great check, great clap back. He leaves you speechless. You can't say a word. Then he goes on and he talks about, behold now, behemoths, which I have made as well as you. So he's telling him, these are the things that I've made, these great things that I've made. Because when we start to talk about a behemoth, we know that it's a gigantuan type creation that he's talking about at this point. So he says, which he eats grass like an ox. Behold now his strength in his loins and his power in the muscle of his belly. So he's talking about that he eats grass like an ox, but the strength that he has in his limbs and his thighs and the powers in the muscles of his stomach, how his stomach is so strong that it can break down whatever he needs to digest. He bends his tail like a cedar. You know, when we talk about cedar, we talk about the cedar trees of Lebanon. They're known for their strength. So he's talking about this powerful tail that he can bend and wag back and forth. He's saying the power of that. The sinews of his thighs are knit together, his bones and tubes of bronze. So the bones that he has are so strong. They're not like regular animals that you could get to and you could actually break their bones. He says the limbs are like bars of iron. And it was talking about his limbs and his rib cage, that all of these things, the way that I made him to give Job a reference point of the strength of how I've made this person, to tell them that it's impenetrable. This is not something that just is something you can dismiss. Oh, it can be killed, it can be handled. Not like this. This is what he's telling Job. He is the first of the ways of God. Let his marker bring near his sword. Surely the mountains bring him food, and all the beasts of the field play there. Under the lotus plant he lies down in the covert of the reeds in the marsh. Now, when we start to talk about that and we start to put all these pieces together that God has given a description of, it most likely is describing of a hippopotamus. Because if you look at a hippopotamus has skin that looks like armor, and every single piece of his body almost looks like it has a shield over it, like a covering over it, and all of his limbs work inside of that covering. So he's saying that this is the type of creation that I make that is impenetrable. You just cannot get rid of it. You can't break it. You can't do things to it. And this is what he's telling. And then he has the flexibility that he can be anywhere. That he says where the mountains bring him food. If they want to start grabbing other animals and eating them, that's what they'll do. But they eat in the water, and that they have the ability, what they say, hippopotamus are so dangerous because they take deep breaths of water and they can stay underwater for a long time. And that when they actually start to emerge, um, they're fast. They're fast in the water, they're fast outside of the water. So they're very hard to fight. They're very, very hard to fight. And if you've ever seen on any of the National Geographics or anything like that, that when you see hippopotamus fight, they're very, very violent, very violent. But the strength that they actually exhibit, that no man can stand up against it. So this is the reference of the behemoth. The lotus plants cover him with shade. The willows of the brook surround him. If a river rages, he's not alarmed. So that tells you that he has great strength, that he can anchor himself. He doesn't even have to worry about if there's a flood or whatever. He's just going to stand there. Now, we know a flood will take cars and make them start to float away. But he's saying here that if a river rages, he is not alarmed. He's not bothered by it. He'll just keep moving through it because his strength that he has. He is confident, though the Jordan rushes to his mouth. As the water comes at him, he's not shaken by it. Can anyone capture him when he is on watch? When a hippo is on watch and he's looking at you, you don't have a chance. Because, like I said, he's quick in the water and he's quick on the ground. With barbs, can anyone pierce his nose? Can you use a trap to try to get him? No. If you've ever watched any of those things, how they try to get him, they have to use super, super duper big stuff to try to even penetrate the skin so that they could even do things like when they were trying to tag them or give them medical attention. It is a major task. It's nothing like just shooting at, it's easier to do a bear than it is to do a hippo. So this is the analogy that God is giving to Job at this point. So that's 40. So 41, he says, um, God starts to show the power that was created in the creatures. So he says, can you draw out Leviathan? Now, we talked about Leviathan before, and as we explained to that is almost like a super strength. Whenever people talk about the spirit of Leviathan, that if you have to deal with that, that you better be armed and ready to deal with that, because this is not one of those little spirits that you can deal with without having yourself grounded and rooted, because if not, it will eat you alive. It will eat you alive. But it almost like that thing when the demon came out and it says, Jesus, I know, Paul, I don't know you, and how it whipped the clothes off of them. Well, think of that times 10, because that is the power of Leviathan that actually we're talking about here. So he says, can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? Can you try to catch him? Or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Or will he speak to you with soft words? He's saying, so do you think that you can go out there and just throw your rod out there and you're going to hook him up like you would do a whale? Well, Leviathan is so massive that Leviathan eats the whale. That's just to give the perspective of the strength and the enormity of what Leviathan is. So they're saying at this point, and supplication, you think he's going to listen to you? Is he going to hear you? You think that he's going to say, "Oh, it's okay, Job. Don't worry about it." Do you think he's going to talk to you like that? This is what he's saying. And he says, "Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? Will you deal with Leviathan?" Now, as we go further in here, we'll figure out that Leviathan, the way that the word is actually talking about it, is really referring to Satan. And and the strength that Satan actually has. And so he's asking, will you bow down to Satan? This great being, will you bow down to him? Because you know who I am, that I am the creator, that I am above all things. All things are mine. I've made all things, they're mine. I've created them. But what choice will you be making? And then he goes on to say, will you play with him as with a bird? Are you going to be stupid about it and just gently try to deal with him? Oh, just flutter around him, play with him, play around him, act like you don't know who he is and what he's capable of. Or will you bind him for your maidens? Now, if you remember, I think it is the creature from the Black Lagoon, where they used to have the sea creature that used to come up and they would tie up the maidens for the sea creature so that he could take them away so that he wouldn't attack the little islands or whatever they had there. And that reminded me of that particular thing when it says, will you bind up your maidens for him? Because this is Leviathan, the strong creature that has the will to do whatever he wants to do. Because no man, anything that is made of dust, has any power against this particular creature that has been actually created. So then it says, will the traders bargain over him? Will they divide him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? So he's asking these questions. I'm telling you how big this is, and I don't want you to mistake what you're dealing with. And that is exactly what happens that when we deal with Satan, that we cannot mistake who we're dealing with. that he is all these different things, that he will cause us to misjudge who he is and pacify with other things, not understanding that yet he's still on his same post of what he wanted to do and what he will do to you. But you can sit and placate him all you want to and act like you can just ask him for things and play on the other side and treat him like, oh, he's no threat. He's my friend. You can try it if you want to, but he's talking about all these things. I'm letting you know what you're dealing with. All the spears and the harpoons. We know harpoons come from whaling ships. You know, can these things penetrate him? Can they lay a hand on him? Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Once you tangle with him, he's telling you, remember the battle. You're not going to do that anymore. And that's just like when we have encounters with Satan, that we uh, get to a point where we stay very prayed up and focused, because when you go into battle with different things, you cannot go in half-hearted. You have to be fully armored when you go in. And even in that, he's still saying here that this is a fight that you will not forget. You will always remember exactly what it took. And it is not for the faint of heart. Behold, your expectations is false. Will you be laid low even at the sight of him? Well, when you see this thing, are you going to pass out? Are you going to grovel? Are you going to fall to your face? What's going to happen? No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. Don't play with him. Because when you wake him up and you allow him freedom, this is what you're going to have to deal with. Who then is he that can stand before me? So he's asking him again, who is this that can stand before me? Who has given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. So he's reminding Job once again, I've created everything. Everything under the heavens belongs to me. Everything. And what he's actually letting Job know right now is that with the enormity of everything that Job went through, that Job, I painted this picture to show you the behemoth. I'm painting this picture to show you the Leviathan. Job, you could not stand up against these things unless I was with you. So that was the revelation of all of this, that as he paints these pictures of these monsters that are going on, and these monsters that come in our house, in our particular lives and attack us, that we cannot stand some of the suffrage and the situations that we go through if God was not with us. We go through a whole lot of things and say, "Oh, God wasn't with me. God's not. God's upset. He's left me." You could not go through these things if God did not stay with you. He is interceding for you at all times. You're not getting what exactly you could have, because as they go into these destructive type things, they're telling you that you can't stop them. But God designates that because everything under heaven is mine, that he has the power. This is where he's telling him at this point. I will not keep silent concerning his limbs or his mighty strength of his orderly frame. Who can strip off his outer armor? Who can come within his double mail? Who can open the door of his face? Around his teeth there is terror. So he's saying, who can open his mouth? Because, when through the research, some of the people were going back and forth of what they were talking about, the descriptive portion of the Leviathan. Like we know when they talked about the behemoth, it kind of compared to the hippopotamus. But here it is a completely different type creature. And some thought it to be a crocodile, because when it says about opening its mouth and then the terror of his teeth. Now, we all know that crocodiles have massive rows of teeth, and that the power of the jaw and all these other things and what they do. And then the name Leviathan means twisting one. So this is where the comparison comes in, where they think that it was a crocodile, because we all know that when the crocodile gets its prey, that it goes into this turning motion, and that it's beating its prey as it's taking it down, where it goes and it actually submerges it and puts it in a den until it's ready to feast on it. So it lets it get tenderized, pulverized, whatever it's doing. But this is the means of how it actually attacks its victim. And then it goes on and says, um, his strong scales are his pride, shut up as a tight seal. So we know that any crocodile that you've seen, the armor, they always talk about the armor of the crocodile, that each particular layer of skin is so tight that nothing can hardly penetrate these things. Um, there's a show that they actually have that's about the Cajun people, and they actually go out and kill alligators and different things like that. The only way that they can kill them is they have to use a gun and shoot them in the head. That's just basically how they kill those things. But I've seen on that particular show that when people have tried to pull them in with strings, that they've got pulled in the water, or they've gotten injuries to their hands or their legs and stuff because of the awesome power of these particular creatures. So this is kind of letting us know exactly how the construction of the body of this animal is made, that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. So all of the scales that are on their back, if you had a pair of gator shoes or a gator purse, that is completely smooth. You might have a ridge piece depending on the age of the animal, but as far as the skin in itself, it's flawless. It's completely sealed. And then he goes on and says, shut up as tight with a seal. One is so near to another, there's no air in between them. They are joined one to another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. He sneezes and flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of morning. So this is where the description starts to change a little bit, where it comes from just a crocodile to now we're going into the perspective of it being more like a dragon. So it says, out of his mouth goes burning torches, sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils, smoke goes forth, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coal, and the flame goes forth from his mouth. So this would be indicative of what the mythological um, description of a dragon would be like. And we find that most mariners, sailors, they all have these stories about meeting the Leviathan, when in sea, at sea, and the different things that have occurred because they've encountered the Leviathan and how they were helpless, that they've sunk ships. There are many coastal towns, especially like around Alaska and different places like that, where people go out and they go, they're in the fishing industry, and how many of them have been lost because ships have been sank, and they accorded or give credit to Leviathan that happened, that they saw things while they were out there, and this is what happened. Then it goes on to say, in his neck lodges strength, that he is strong. He is strong. That his flesh are joined together, firm on him and immovable. That when Leviathan comes and it gets you, or Satan comes in and gets you, that he is strong. Don't ever get it twisted that the devil is not strong. He is strong. And then it talks about that his flesh is close together. There's no relief. There's no space anywhere for you to actually get some type of relief from him. There's nothing there. It just holds you. There's sometimes when you get things, you can get a little arm room, just a little bit of breather. But when it has you, when you are in his class, he has you just like that. And this is the same thing that Job experienced, that he was in the class of Satan and there was no room for him to get any type of relief. It just seemed to get worse and worse and worse and worse. So then when we actually go on further, it talked about his heart is as hard as a stone, has no sympathy for you, even as hard as a lower millstone. When he rises himself up, the mighty fear. There's no one that can stand up against him. Even your strongest man would be afraid of him. The sword that reaches him cannot avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. That when these things come to him, they can't penetrate him. So he just tends to kind of look at it and laugh, like, okay, this is what we're doing now. And it says he regards irons as straw, any type of metal, some of the hardest things that we've thought that we've used, steel and different things like that. He looks at it like straw, and bronze as rotten wood. So all the things that we think that are would make something penetrable or withstand something, he's coming around and turning all these things and saying they're nothing. And the arrows cannot make him flee. He's not afraid. Then it says clubs are regarded as stubble. Clubs are regarded as stubble. They're nothing. He laughs at the rattling of the javelins. His underparts are like sharp hot shards. That means that there is very few areas where he's vulnerable to any of these things that they're trying to do to him. So his underparts, you have to remember, they're down. So the things that you can see and all the description that we've had, it's impenetrable. So this is what it's saying. He makes the death boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a jar of ointment. Behind him, he makes a wake of shine. One would think the deep to be gray hair, that he causes so much commotion with the moving of his body and his tail and whatever that he's using, that it stirs up the sea, that we start to see this disturbance at sea, where we have so many white caps that you see that it's saying that the sea was gray hair. So this is the power of what we're dealing with right here. And then it says, nothing on this earth is like him, one made without fear. He has no fear. There's nothing that you can do that will cause him to fear. He looks on everything that is high. He is the king over the sons of pride. He could care less about whatever you do. It's the prideful thing. It is all about him, how he will show things. And he's the king of all this. He's not considerate of following God. He has no fear of anybody. It is just him. He's that person. When he shows up, when Satan shows up in any of our lives, he wants to take over. It's all about him. It's like this narcissistic type behavior. It's all about him. He cares nothing else about anybody else. The pride that he cares, that when I come in the room, I'm wrecking. I'm wrecking it. I'm wrecking lives. I'm wrecking everything. I can do what I want to do. Those people that are available to me. This is what this description is actually talking about, how powerful Satan is. Now we're going to go to 42. And 42 actually talks about where Job actually comes to a point where the humility is actually kicked in, and he is feeling a lot better at this point because he realized that all the time he thought God was not with him. He realized that God had never forsaken him and that he was always with him. So it was that he had that comfort that he felt once before, but it was different because God outlined this time that, you know, last week for Bible study, we were talking about when Jesus came to visit Mary and Martha. And Martha was so angry because she wanted Mary to come and actually help her get the house together and clean up. And she had the audacity to tell Jesus to tell her to help me. And he said no, because Mary sat at his feet to garner from his wisdom and his knowledge because she realized who he was. The same thing that happened here with Job. Job knew who God was. He was familiar with him, but yet he forgot who he was. He forgot that the power that God had, that anything that he would go through to know that he should be confident enough, even though it is horrible what happened to him, but to know that God never left him because Job started feeling that God had forsaken him and left him all alone. That was not it. Job could not have gone through all these things that he wanted to do. When Job started to talk about he wanted to die and could not die, that's because God did not allow him to die. By every natural course, Job should have been dead from the infections, from the starvation, from the weight loss and malnutrition, you know, all the things that would go along where he was at, he should have logically been dead. But because of God, but God is the reason why Job did not face all those things that he desperately said he wanted. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that thou canst do all things, that thou canst do all things, and that no purpose of thine can be thwarted. Anything that you want to have done, God, I know already that no one can stop you. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore, I have declared that which I do not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I do not know. So he's going back now to actually address his lack of true knowledge of who God is and the infinite wisdom or abilities of God. He does not want to assume at this point that he's so common with God that he knows his movements and who God is in that particular manner and not have the reverence for him that he is God and God Almighty. He says, hear me now, I will speak. I will ask thee, and do not instruct me. I have heard of thee by the hearing of my ears. I've heard everything that you've said to me. Because remember, he spoke to him in this whirlwind. So I've heard everything. Because think about a whirlwind. A whirlwind is very noisy, it carries its own sound. But here, Job is pointing out that I heard you with my ear. In spite of all of that noise, he still was able to hear him. But now my eyes see thee. Therefore, I retract and I repent in dust and ashes. So we remember where we talked about in those particular days when at a point of shame or disgrace, what they would do was cover their bodies with ashes and dust and rub it all over their head. So this was a point where Job was actually repentant of his past actions and his assumptions and how he had spoken so self-righteously about himself, yet not understanding that God is who he says he is, that he will never leave us, he will never forsake us. And that just because things get tight or they get scary does not mean that God is not with us. Then, so as God was continuing the conversation with Job, he says, and it came to pass because but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So it came to pass after the Lord had spoken these words to Job that the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends because you have not spoken of me what is right as my servant Job has. So all of this stuff their friends was doing and all this talking and thinking that they were right, you never represented God right. You never encouraged him correctly. You kept encouraging him to commit or admit these sins that he did, but you never stood with him that if that was his belief, in his belief that he knew he had not done anything wrong, you did not support him, but you came along and did everything except what you were supposed to do. And you were supposed to be representing me. Because remember, we talked about who these people were back in like the first and I think the first between the first and the third chapter that we talked about who they were. They were upstanding, righteous men as well, well learned. So they should have known more about how to support their brother in the trials and tribulations versus trying to condemn him, trying to get him to come out. And he's just basically pleading with them, believe me. And yet they did not have faith enough to believe that God was with him. And they tried to let him know that on every particular court. And he says, and against your two friends, because you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now, therefore, take for yourself 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job and offer up a burnt offering for yourself, and my servant Job will pray for you. Now, as we remember that the only people that actually could do burnt offerings were actually priests at that time. So it tells you about who these men were, and that Job was the priest for his family. We talked about that in 1. So now God is putting him at a point where he has to pray for those that, you might as well say, despitefully used him, because everything that they could do to tear him down and talk about his character and why he was suffering and things like that, they never offered him an ounce of compassion. They sat with him originally in silence, but thereafter it caused all the accusations and the condemnation and all these different things. But yet Job held fast to his truth that he had not done anything. And then it goes on and says, um, and for I will accept him so that I may not do with you according to your folly. He says, Job is your breaker. He says, out of all these things that are going on, the reason that I'm not getting you and destroying you is because of this man and what he held on to and what his beliefs were. So he says, so Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Hamathite went and did as the Lord told them, and the Lord accepted Job. So he accepted what Job prayed for them, and he was okay with them. But Job, see, we have to be very careful when we get so caught up in being so spiritual and high that we can't listen to the Lord or pray to him for direction and guidance. And we're just on our own, just going out there sprouting and telling people, well, this is this and this is this, that we become so um, religious that we lose all the relationship that should have been there, the compassion that when you don't know what to do, that you seek God and ask him for direction. And this didn't happen with these people. So this is why God did what he did, but he allowed them, Job, to see victory when he allowed Job to be the reason that they were not punished for what they had did. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job, and he prayed for his friends, and the Lord increased all that Job had twofold. Then all the brothers of all the sisters and all who had known him before came to him, and they ate the bread with him at his house, and they consoled him and comforted him from all the evil that the Lord had brought on him. So all this time, Job has gone through all these things, and we have to remember no one showed him an ounce of compassion. But God can take things that, when things are taken away from you, he can return those things and turn them around and give you exceedingly and abundantly of more than you could ever think of. So here he had the love of his family again, his sisters. He's back in a home. The things that were taken away from him, that God was restoring these things back to him. And then it says, and then when each one of them came, they each gave him a piece of silver. They gave him a gold ring. And then they were saying that the gold ring was to actually show reverence to who he was, because they now realized that Job was innocent, that he was a man of God, that he stood on his profession of his faith. He did not allow people to come and make him compromise who he was. And the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, and he had 14,000 sheep and 6,000 camels and 1,000 yoke of oxen and 1,000 female donkeys. And he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. So we see that God replenished it double fold. Because why do we say double fold? Because he had it before. So now he replaced everything that was taken from him. And he had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he named the first daughter Jemima, Jemima, and Jemima means turtle dove or bright, day bright. And then he named her second one Kezia, and Kezia means cinnamon or cassia, a fragrant scent. Then the last one, his third daughter, was Kareen Hapuch, and her name means a jar of eye paint or horn of beauty. The idea was that she was so beautiful that she did not need any type of enhancements or any type of cosmetics to make her look beautiful. So it says that Job was blessed with the most beautiful daughters in the land. And there were no women that were found as fair as Job's daughters, and their father gave them inheritance among their brothers. So Job still had an inheritance left for his children. Even though he lost everything, God restored it, and that he was able to give to Job. And after this, Job lived 140 years and saw his sons and his grandsons 4 generations. And Job died an old man, full of his days. Now, that last part, full of his days, in my research, it actually talked about is that Job died when he was satisfied with living. Now, isn't that ironic that he at one point wanted to die? He cursed the day that he was born, his birth. But now God granted him this particular opportunity that he lived as long as he wanted to. So, this is why Job is called the book, the divine truth book. Um, and divine truth is actually found in the book of Job. The instructions on how to go through suffering can be ascertained from the book of Job, that it teaches you how to go through things, even though the worst comes up in your life, that to hold on to know that in spite of how big you think your problems or your situation is, that the God you serve is much bigger than all that you could ever imagine. There is nothing that is made because he owns everything under heaven is his. And he says that in his word. So this ends for Job for us. Thank you for listening to me. I went a little bit over, but it's a great story. And it ends well because after all the attrition that Brother Job went through, we needed to take time to celebrate with him that the restoration in God that we have available to us. But we have to hold steadfast and don't look to the left or right, but keep our eyes upon him, and he will bring us through. Well, God bless you. Thank you all for joining me. Be here with us tomorrow. Bring a friend, tell a friend as we go through the Bible chronologically. God bless you all. Have a good evening.